What is up, everyone? So today's topic is suspension for the NSX. So suspension being the hardships that we have with the NSX with the design of the suspension arms and how that affects the coilovers. So this is probably going to affect most coilovers for the NSX. That being, I get questions every now and then about, and I see questions online about people who are having trouble lowering their car enough. And what they mean is that if you see here, this control arm rides really close to the coilovers. And of course, the coilover location is not going to change even depending on what brand you have. And in this case, for the KWs, we are touching. I know it's kind of hard for you guys to see. There you go. The arm does touch the collar of the KWs. And it will probably touch the collar of many coilovers unless you run a short spring. And let me get into there's a little bit of we have to discuss here. It gets more complicated when you have a cup kit as well. But essentially, to lower your car, especially on a coilover like this, where the height is not independent of the spring preload, meaning there's not a separate perch down below that you can adjust height with independent of the spring preload. There's only one perch that adjusts height and spring preload. So when you have this and you want to lower your car, you obviously have to lower this spring collar, this spring perch downwards. And what happens is when people first install it, they basically run into this issue where the collar hits the arm and they can't go down any further. So what do you do? And then what basically they max it out, go as far as you can go down. They drop the car onto the ground, and then there's like a big old wheel gap still. So to get around that, you have to jack up the car. So jack up the arm, I should say. So I have my jack underneath the arm with a piece of wood. And what happens is, when you jack up the arm, you can see that it starts separating. The collar moves away from the arm. And when you do that, let's do it a few more times. When you do that, of course, the helper springs are collapsing, but you can start adjusting the collar downwards. What that means is you'll be able to lower your car more, but of course, this collar will make contact with your arm sooner in the suspension arms movement rather than later. Now, that's not ideal. So let me show you. If I lower it all the way down, right? The collar is going to make contact with the arm. If I push it all the way down. So no, that's not ideal, but a lot of people run it like that on the NSX because that's the only way to get it basically where the tire is, proper lowering, looks good to most people essentially, where, there's either like a half an inch gap or less. And it's not really an issue on the road because for this, basically what's happening here, for this to happen on the road, like you never want your collar to hit your arm on the road. But for this to happen on the road, you'd have to be going, the suspension is at full droop right now, right? It's fully dropped. It's fully unloaded. For this to happen on the road, you'd have to be going off-road, right? You'd have to be going over a jump. And you'd be having to go over a big enough jump where you'd have enough time for your wheels to fully drop. So that's very unlikely and very, not a lot of people are going to run into that issue. So most times people are going to run, within a range. Let's say of here, and then a little bit more collapse. Because when you're on the road, these helper springs are fully collapsed, right? The weight of the car fully collapses these helper springs. So it might be something like from here, the droop that you get achieve on the road may be something like this to fully collapsed. And in that range, your collar will not hit the arm. So that's kind of one of the biggest drawbacks and problems with the NSX suspension, meaning coilovers and arm. So I hope that answers a few questions on that topic. Basically, if you want to lower your car enough, you need to raise up your arms, and then you can lower the perches on your coilovers. All right, now when I mentioned earlier that the cup kits kind of exacerbate this issue, is that the cup kits take up some space, okay? So the top hat is up here and the cup kit starts here. The spring touches the inside of this cup kit, which I don't know the thickness of the actual cup kit, top layer of the cup kit. But you are required to get shorter springs. And with a cup kit specifically, you do need some amount of droop, meaning that if you did not have a cup kit and you did not need a certain amount of droop, of course some people do want droop anyway even without a cup kit. Let's just say you're a hardcore person and you don't want droop and you just want to run a main spring. That means that this spring perch would be moved all the way up here to match the spring if you were running a shortened spring like I am. The factory KW spring is longer. I can't remember how much we shortened this by, or what we're required to purchase for the KW offhand. I can't remember. I think it's like 30 mil or 60 mil or something like that shorter. But anyway, if you were to not run a helper spring, this perch would be up higher, and you'd have less of a chance of hitting the arm. But with a cup kit, that's unavoidable because you need this amount of droop travel, which is what the helper spring is providing right now, in order for the airbag to have something to inflate and some space to take up in order for you to raise your car, right? If your spring was just up here, so the cup kit is deflated right now. If the perch was up here and you just ran a main spring and you put a cup kit on top of it and the cup kit inflated, this spring would just be pushing off of the airbag on top and pushing off of this perch on the bottom, and it would not raise your car. What would happen is the airbag would be fighting against the tension or weight of the spring. It needs something like this, or if you don't want to run a helper spring at all, it still needs some kind of droop travel, meaning some space for the shock to expand and physically raise your car. So that's kind of one of the bigger drawbacks of this whole thing, of this whole car, and of cup kits in general too. So like for me, in a hypothetical world, if I did not have a cup kit, and I ran into this issue of this bothering me, I'd probably just run a spring similar to this height, or maybe a little bit longer, and no helper spring, and just that way I have no issues with possibility of the arm contacting this. That's a one scenario. Like I mentioned earlier, it's in the real world. It's unlikely for you to achieve this much droop out on public streets. You know, again, you'd have to be going off of like a Evel Knievel style ramp for your wheels to drop this much. It's not really an issue for the regular people. All right, and here's a final look at it fully compressed. I have it jacked up to the point where the front end is just raising off of this jack stand, so I know that the full weight is on the front end. And you can see how much space we have here. So if you had a longer spring, this perch would be lower, obviously, and then it would obviously make contact with the arm a lot sooner. And then, again, using that jump scenario, it would take less of a jump to achieve the amount of droop needed to where this perch would contact your arm. So it is recommended to buy a shorter spring as per stance parts. And that information is in my stance parts cup kit installation videos. couple of other, since I'm talking about suspension, a couple of other pro tips. I use this set screw. This is an Allen head set screw for the perch. I use it as my counter for turning. So I always point it out directly at myself. I had it previously the other way, or possibly didn't care where it landed, and it was kind of a pain to fit the little set screw tool in from when I can't see it. And this always gives me allows me to keep track of exactly how many revolutions I've made. I also tend to use tape. So that's marking the last spot I had when I actually had it lower than this, just in case I needed to revert back if I messed up and forgot how many rotations I've counted on the perch when I'm turning it, things like that. You can also write on that piece of tape. So various reasons I've had it on. I just leave it there because I'm lazy to take it off, or sometimes I do want to revert back, and it'll be an easy way to revert back to the previous height that I've had it on. Maybe I'm doing a little troubleshooting or something like that. Finally, the final note is that even without the cup kit, you do want to cut the the bump stop, to give you as much suspension travel as possible. However, you do not want to cut too much. Let me try to drop this down, see if I can pull the bump stop down. All right, so here is the bump stop. So you can see here that I have, all right, it's gonna be hard to measure, but I have roughly 20-ish millimeters of bump stop left. And I'm going to throw on the wheels right now and tell you why exactly you cannot cut too much bump stop. Because if I push this all the way up, let me push this all the way up first. All right, this is gonna be very hard for you guys to see, but you can check out in there, you can see the bump stop. There is very little travel. I'm gonna try to measure how much travel that is. I have the car again jacked up to basically ride height level. And let's see if I can measure the amount of travel. Okay, it's impossible to show you, but I have less than 30 millimeters of travel. Probably closer to like 20 to 25 millimeters of travel. And so let me throw on a wheel and tell you why you need the correct amount of bump. Because when I put on a wheel, the reason for a bump stop is to keep your tire from contacting your fender, your chassis, whatever. If you just say, F it, I want as much travel, I want to maximize the amount of travel, and you remove the bump stop or you cut it too short, for example, nothing's going to stop your wheel, especially if you're slammed, from just jamming itself into the fender. All right, so if you want to check your bump stops and whether they can be cut or not, you do want to lift up your wheel with a jack. And for safety reasons, you don't want to necessarily put your jack forward facing or in line with the wheel like this, because of the way the casters on the jack are. If you have the jack off center, either forward or backwards, it could slide off because your front wheels can spin. Obviously this will not be an issue on your rear if your e-brake works. So I suggest putting the jack perpendicular, jacking it up in the center of the wheel like this until your car comes off of the jack stands very slightly. Don't do it too much. You don't want to pose a danger to yourself or your car. You can see it's off of the jack stand. So now I know that basically the weight of the vehicle is on the suspension, and this is simulating, the car sitting on the ground. So this is the wheel gap that I have right now, and this is the incorrect way to test bump stop, because your spring, while it's at rest, is not being compressed. So that is why you need to remove the spring completely and install your entire coilover with the bump stop in order for your wheel to show you exactly where the bump stop will engage, because you cannot simulate your spring compressing under the vehicle's weight in your garage. All right, so you ask, what do you need to do then to figure out what size bump stop you need? It takes work. It's not fun, but what you need to do is remove your suspension. Well, I mean, you're gonna have to remove it anyway to cut your bump stops, but you need to remove your suspension, take apart your suspension, take out the springs, remove the springs completely, leave the bump stops in, reassemble your coilover without the springs in, put it in, reinstall it in your car, put your wheel on, and jack up the wheel and see how close it is to touching stuff that you do not want it to touch. Basically, if you don't want it to touch, rip out your fender liner, you don't want it to touch your fender, or maybe you're not running your fender liner, you don't want it to touch your fender, you need to jack it up and see where the bump stop allows your wheel to stop moving, basically. And so, you know, if you remove the spring and then your bump stop basically sits right here, or your wheel, it allows your wheel to sit right here, then you know that you can cut out, you know, this much amount or however much amount you want from the bump stop. In my case, as you saw from the image, basically when I removed the spring and had the bump stops where I'm at right now with a 20 mil or so bump stop, my tire came up to tucked right in the inner fender liner in the fender, and I don't want it to go anymore. It'll basically tear out my fender liner, and so I know that my bump stop is as small as I want it to be, or as small as I can make it. And if I cut it anymore, the wheel's obviously going to move up more. So you gotta think about that. You cannot just leave your springs in and jack up the wheel, because when your car is sitting like this, your spring is not compressing. When you hit a dip at speed, your springs are going to compress, and that's what's going to move your wheel up into your arch. And then whether you hit your bump stop or whether your spring coils hit each other, which they call coil bind, you're going to have to tune your suspension in that way. I can't, that's a lot to get into. But basically, you know, depending on what you prefer, I guess, most people probably prefer that you hit your bump stops before your coils bind or before your wheels hit any part of your body. So you're gonna have to just basically do a lot of test and check. You know, take out the springs, reinstall your coilovers, reassemble your coilovers, reinstall your coilovers on the car with the wheels, jack it up, see where it lays, and then cut your bump stops to the correct length, and then of course take everything out apart again so you can reinstall your springs and all that. Again, just make sure not to, make sure to do it the correct way and not be fooled into thinking that you have a lot more bump stop to cut than you really do. So I think that's about it for this video. So I think that'll be it, and I will see you guys in the next video.